Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you for also giving me the opportunity to be with you. So my name is Antoine Vella. I'm from the data unit of the research branch in UNODC, and I'm very pleased here to be moderating this event, where we hope to be pulling together the two different streams of work, which the Praia Group has been doing on governance statistics, and at the same time, we want to bring that together with the very valuable work which has been led mainly by Salome on corruption from the UNODC side, in particular the development of the corruption framework, which we will hear about a little bit in a minute. Before we get started, obviously, I wanted to remind everybody that we have interpretation in 3 languages, so please feel free to choose the language of your choice from the menu. Also, if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat function. We will try to monitor it, and subject to availability of time, we will try to address some of those questions. Finally, I would like to remind all the speakers that we actually do not have a lot of time. We have a lot of speakers in a 60-minute time slot, so please try to stick to the scheduled time. And so with that, I would already move on to the first speaker, who was Mr. Jose Eduardo Silva Garcia from the Statistical Office of Cabo Verde. Mr. Garcia will talk to us about the Praia City Group per se and its activities. Mr. Garcia, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Antoine. Good afternoon, all, and good evening to the ones that are far from here in Praia. My name is Jose. Are you listening well?
Yes, we hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jose Garcia. I'm the coordinator of the secretariat here in INECV from the group Praia, and I want to give a small enlightenment to the ones that do not know yet or know less the work that Praia Group is doing. Salome, can you please go to the second? Thank you. Okay, for the ones that know, I will update the information, but for the ones that don't know, the Praia Group was created in 2015 and is the first city group in Africa hosted by INE Cabo Verde. We believe that we was the first entity to work specifically on governance statistics in general issues, all the dimensions. In our first mandate, that was 2015-2020, we published the handbook on governance statistics that was publicized in the end of our first mandate in 2020, and with all the support and partnership from UNDP, OECD, UNODC, INEHI, OHCA, HR, IRD, Paris, lots of entities. After our first mandate, we have in the 2020 UNSC, we have our mandate renewed from 2020 to 2025. The handbook identified 8 dimensions: non-discrimination and equality, participation in political and public affairs, openness, access to and quality of justice, responsiveness, absence of corruption, trust, safety and security. These dimensions was also the ones that the new classification that also governance is now official, and there was the base that was used by UNODC and the task team that they joined in the Center of Excellence of INEHI also for the new classification that Mr. Oscars will talk soon. The Praia Group in the end of 2021, after a wide consultation from our base members, we opened 2 task teams on 2 dimensions: non-discrimination equality, that is conducted at the moment by Peru and Finland, and have the support of OGC UNDP from Oslo and OHCHR, And also we have the participation and political and public affairs task team conducted by Norway and Tunisia and supported by UNDP, OGC, UN Women. These task teams, they developed basically a questionnaire at the moment, and we are now in the end of the first step of the production of this questionnaire, and we are now in the phase of doing the cognitive tests of both questionnaires. At the moment, we are also searching for the NSOs that have interest in participating in this process. We are open to receive your manifestation of interest if you are interested on our email that is there, group.praia@gmail.com if you are interested. Now I will pass to another matter that we have at the moment in Praia Group. The Praia Group is ruled by, or at least is advised by, a steering committee that it's composed at the moment by 7 members. We are searching also, and we hope soon we will do a call for new members that can help us to manage in the steering committee the group. We have this table with the type of institutions. Please, Salome, can you go further? Thank you. The requisites, we search its institutions or entities that have regional diversity, that have record on work on governance statistics, that can mobilize other NSOs to contribute to work of Praia Group, that are in a general mode, we can say champions on governance statistics. The process of selection that was defined, it has 2 project approach. It can be done, or it will be done by an open call, or individually. The 7 members at the moment of the steering committee can encourage or invite potential candidates. We hope when this process of candidature finish to have select the new members in the next steering committee meeting that we plan to do in August. Okay, the Praia Group is this new mandate. We choose 3 pillars of work: methodological work, capacity development, and advocacy. In the methodological work, in the last meeting we had in our steering committee, the idea was, or the dilemma was, to launch new task teams or focus on the 2 already working. We decide this 2023 to focus on the work of these 2 task teams, and hopefully we will begin new task teams in the next year. In the capacity development, we did a survey, and we decided that in this pillar to try to do trainings, conference, meetings like we are doing today with UNODC, do surveys and methodological developments. Also, in these 3 pillars, we decide to focus more in the advocacy, because what we notice is that maybe it's our point of view that the Praia Group at the moment is not so known, and our will it's that Praia Group can be known better in this all the world. So in the advocacy pillar, we want to highlight the work of the task teams that are now working. We have already 1 article publicized in the OS. It was published last month, or better saying this month, because we are in the 30, not yet. We didn't finish this month. We will also update our website. We want to, in the next future, to produce blog series, and also to create a newsletter that can reach our members. Okay, only to finish, as I told before, we want to update our website soon. It will be hosted by INSCV in our website, but we want also to link on our website from UNSC page also. But at the moment, I will invite you all to check the SDG 16 Hub on the Praia Group link. It's there, but you can go to the SDG 16 Hub and check all the documents and the work that was being done and he's been doing at the moment by the tax team that we have. Okay, so thank you all, and don't forget, if you want to communicate with us, contact our email group.praia@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose, for that short introduction highlighting the work of the Praia Group and the governance structure and also your plans for the future. And now we move on to our next speaker, who is Mr. Oscar Jaimes Bello from the National Statistical Office of Mexico. He is the Director General for Government Security and Justice Statistics, and he is going to talk to us first on the classification of statistical activities, and in particular its intersection with governance statistics and the absence of corruption, which is one of the dimensions of the governance statistics. So, Oscar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antoine. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I will talk briefly about the classification of statistical activities. Next, please. The classification started as a regional classification for a specific use in the database of international statistical activities, but over time, its use widened to international organizations and several countries from different regions. In February 2020, the Bureau of the Conference of European Statisticians approved the updating of the classification. The work to update was undertaken by a small task team, including representatives from Canada, Ireland, Mexico, New Zealand, Eurostat, the Statistical Division, and also the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Next, please. It is important to emphasize that the criteria used to update the version of the classification was to be aligned with existing standards and frameworks. For instance, the two new domains that I will mention afterwards, environment and governance statistics, are aligned with frameworks adopted already by the United Nations Statistical Commission. In April and May 2022, the draft of the second edition of the classification was consulted with all countries and organizations. The consultation showed that 46 countries from different regions and 14 international organizations were using or were planning to use the classification. Also, there was a general support among responding countries and organizations that the classification would become a global classification. Considering the comments received from the consultation, the task team made further updates to the second edition of the classification and submitted an updated draft to the UN Committee of Experts on International Statistical Classifications in October 2022. This Committee of Experts recommended the classification in its submission for the UN Statistical Commission in its 54th session. At this session, held at the end of February and the beginning of March 2023, the updated classification was endorsed by the United Nations Statistical Commission. Next, please. The classification provides a high-level structure to facilitate the search for information. As a result, the second edition of the classification provides 7 strategic domains with their respective components, which are not mutually exclusive, but can be used in different areas. These domains are demographic and social statistics, economic statistics, environment statistics, governance statistics, cross-cutting statistics, and the two other domains that 6 and 7, statistical infrastructure and strategic and management activities. Next, please. Well, this is the classification. The governance statistics, the domain 4, it's divided in non-discrimination and equality, participation, openness, access to and quality of justice, responsiveness, and absence of corruption, trust, safety and security, and governance statistics, the residual. Next, please. About the absence of corruption, 406 on governance statistics covers statistical activities on the level of intolerance to corruption, for instance, ethical values, principles and norms that strengthen resistance to corruption and practices, the levels and patterns of corrupt practices, and the response to corruption by the state. That would be all, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Oscar, for the presentation and for highlighting the history of the classification and the latest developments. I see there is a question. There was a question in the tab, but I think we are a little bit short of time. We can perhaps come back to it at the end if there is still more time. So at this point, I would move on to our next speaker, who is Ms. Salome Flores, who is currently the head of the UNODC Information Center in Tashkent, and who will talk to us about the UNODC's efforts to build the statistical framework to measure corruption. Salome, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antoine. Good morning, colleagues in America, and good afternoon to those in Europe and to those in Africa as well. Thanks for joining us. We're very happy to organize this webinar together with the Praia Group and the Statistical Office of Mexico, INEGI, to share what we have been working on a framework to measure corruption. As we know, the UN Convention Against Corruption has an article that talks about the importance of collecting, exchanging, and analyzing information on corruption. But for a long time, we have not had clarity about what data should member states be collecting and how to combine this data to make it more relevant, to produce indicators that allow member states to monitor their policies or strategies to tackle corruption. And well, we've been trying, and UNODC, for quite some time to further develop methodologies that can help countries to measure corruption. In the context of SDGs, we were working jointly with UNDP and with INEGI, the Statistical Office of Italy, ISTAT, and other experts, the Statistical Office of Indonesia, to produce this manual on corruption surveys. And we're happy to say that we see little by little that more countries are using the manual to measure the prevalence of bribery in households, but also in businesses. And these are two indicators that go beyond measuring the perception of corruption and try to produce these estimates of the prevalence of the actual people experiencing corruption. And this is very important, but it's still very limited. So we, as UNODC, receive mandates from the Conference of State Parties and from the special session of the General Assembly Against Corruption, the UNGAS 2021, to work and develop a comprehensive, scientifically sound and objective statistical framework to measure different aspects of corruption. And we've been working on that for the last 2 years. So for developing this statistical framework following the mandate of the Conference of State Parties and the UNGAS special session on corruption, we did some consultations, global consultations. Some of them were online, others were in person and also in written. And we received inputs from 52 countries from all the region, Most of this feedback came from anti-corruption authorities and criminal justice institutions. We also have participation from national statistical offices. We had international organizations as OECD, but also Transparency International is not there in the list, but they also contributed, the World Bank as well. We also received feedback from civil society organizations and researchers, and really they were all were trying to contribute to identify what were the most robust indicators to measure different types of corruption, to measure the effectiveness of policies, and to measure also if the environment to report corruption was appropriate. So with all this feedback, UNODC produced this statistical framework to measure corruption. This framework was sent to the UN Statistical Commission last year. And in the session, in this year's session, the Commission welcomed the statistical framework, recognize its ambitious nature. You will see in a minute. It's a framework that has more than 100 indicators, and we're not expecting all countries to use all indicators, but the statistical framework gives a very broad overview of what data is relevant and what indicators can be used for monitoring corruption, the levels of corruption, and also the effectiveness of its policies. And finally, the Statistical Commission encouraged UNODC to work together with countries, providing technical support and training, and really promote the implementation of the framework worldwide, because we know that for many countries, measuring corruption is on top of their agendas. The way the statistical framework it's integrated is following this matrix. Basically, we have some indicators on their direct measures. These indicators are useful to describe the magnitude and the direct experience of corruption in different aspects, households, of course, businesses, and other aspects that, as you know, for corruption can be very complex. We also have a very important number of indicators that fall under indirect measures. We have perception indicators, and even though we wanted to move away from perception, we noticed that many countries not only use the Transparency International Perception Index, but also they themselves collect data or conduct surveys to understand what the perception is. So we did include some indicators related to perception, but we also have a number of indicators to identify the risk. This is what are the opportunities for corruption to happen, but also what are the constraints in place to deter corruption from occurring. And finally, we have a number of indicators that are about how the state responds to corruption. Most of them have to do with legal framework, existing legal frameworks or existing institutions or procedures. These are called the de jure indicators, but really are about what actions are member states taking in terms of legislation or procedures to make sure that there is a framework supporting anti-corruption efforts. And finally, there is another set of indicators that have to do with the de facto response. This is mostly actions by the criminal justice, number of investigations, convictions, sentences, assets recovered, and other indicators that you can see on the statistical framework. So this is just to explain to you, to give you a flavor of how the framework looks like. This is the structure. And then, and I think I was already mentioning some of this at the beginning. So you will see a matrix with this combination of indicators, this combination of direct and indirect measures for each one of the dimensions that you can see at the bottom of the screen. So we have direct and indirect measurements for corruption areas that have been criminalized following the UN Convention Against Corruption. We also have the same combination of indicators to monitor preventive measures. And finally, a different dimension that has to do with the environment to report and address corruption. And this is how the framework looks like if we zoom in and go into the details of each one of these dimensions. We have had some discussions about some of these categories, but basically these follow the UN Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC. And like I said, the framework has or more than 100 indicators. So I'm not going to share those indicators with you, but we will post the link of the framework so you can review in detail not only the different concepts, but also the different dimensions and of course the different indicators. We also have another document that is the metadata, in which we have full descriptions of each one of the indicators that was selected, and it's part of this statistical framework. And just to say that after finalizing the framework and after getting the Statistical Commission to welcome this framework, now we're working very actively to disseminate the framework in webinars like this or in meetings with different authorities and statistical offices, so they can learn about the framework and find ways to use it. We have countries that, for example, are redesigning their monitoring frameworks related to corruption. So they're using some of the elements and some of the indicators of the framework. Again, it's not that because we have a framework now, every country should be collecting all the data, but it's a comprehensive framework that can be useful for countries to select those indicators that are relevant for their national context, and that can be useful eventually to monitor their efforts. There is a global conference on harnessing data to improve corruption measurement. This is a conference that is jointly organized by UNODC and IACA, which is the International Academy Against Corruption. This conference will take place in Vienna at the end of August, early September, and we're going to be presenting and discussing the statistical framework there as well. We also have planned to conduct another final online expert consultation, which will take place at October. And then finally, our goal is to take this framework to the CAC Conference of State Parties in December in Atlanta, to have basically the framework and to be adopted by the Conference of State Parties. So after the end of this year, UNODC, together with other agencies, we're already discussing with other agencies, we will work on fully piloting the framework and to also work and do capacity building in all countries that could be interested in adopting this framework. And we will do this together with the UNODC offices and the network of centers of excellence that UNODC already has. So with this, I think I finished my presentation and really invite all the participants to learn more about the framework. And of course, we will be happy to answer any question related to the framework. Then thanks, Antoine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Salome, for this history of the framework and also for describing the content, of course, and the way forward. It's very impressive work, and my congratulations also to you for that. Let me also take the opportunity to remind the audience to use the chat function in case they have any questions. It is probably a little bit more efficient for us to address them through the chat function rather than questions at the end, but we will do our best. So at this point, we move on to the national perspective. We will have perspectives coming from Finland, from Mexico, and from Italy. We begin with our speakers from Finland. Actually, we have two speakers from England. We have Ms. Sofia Selkemaa from the Institute of Criminology and Legal Policy of the University of Helsinki, and Mr. Pekka Henninen, who is a senior statistician from Statistics Finland. I would invite our Finnish speakers. I believe Ms. Sofia Selkemaa was meant to go first. Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. It's a delight to be here today. I think I'm the first speaker with no slides, so just me commenting on the topic. As previously mentioned, I'm Sofia Selkemaa from University of Helsinki, Finland, and I work at the Institute of Criminology and Legal Policy, which is an independent research institute under the university. We do not expertise on researching corruption. However, we help the Statistics Finland to draft some comments on the framework earlier this year, and therefore I am here to present our side from the comments or the story from regarding Finland. I will use my short time to comment the framework for measuring corruption from researchers and also from the Finnish perspective. Before that, a little about my background, so you can put my comments to scale. I have a law degree, so I'm not professional on statistics. However, I also have bachelor level studies on statistics, so I probably know more about statistics than your average lawyer. However, the bar for that is not that high, at least in Finland. I'm also a PhD researcher. My topic is shadow economy, which is a close team to corruption and often seen together. My comments will be given out of this perspective, but luckily we have Pekka from Statistics Finland speaking after me, and he will probably give you more insights from the statistics point of view. With that all being said, I think it's time for me to start commenting the hot topic of the day, meaning the framework. At first, I want to highlight the fact that from researchers' perspective, it is absolutely fantastic. I think I can talk behalf of the research community when I say this kind of framework. Providing comparable data from different countries would be a rather dream come true for most researchers who focus on corruption. When it comes to measuring corruption in Finland, it is crucial to understand what corruption is in Finland. Finland is often seen as a country with little to no corruption. For example, in Transparency International's corruption index, Finland has been ranked at the top 3 least corrupted countries for multiple times. Last year, Finland was placed as the 2nd least corrupted country. Finland and maybe the other Nordic countries, which are often ranked as least corrupted countries too, then face a dilemma when measuring corruption. How do you measure something that's not there? So is it safe to say that there's no corruption in Finland? Of course not. There are no corruption-free countries. It is true that Finland does not have at least that kind of street-level corruption where you would, for example, pay the tax administration, so they would handle your application faster, or in a way you would like it to be handled. Finnish people rarely see or experience corruption in their daily lives. Instead, we face a different type of corruption. It's more discreet, harder to find, and often harder for people to see as corruption. Finland is a small country with only a little over 5 million people. And when it comes to the people in power in local or national level, people often know each other, and that can cause certain problems. Corruption in Finland is often system level, meaning maybe business deals made in zonas, appointing your friends to important positions and so on. Typical forms of corruption in Finland are, for example, conflict of interest, unethical preparation of decisions secretly or between insiders, or favoring some people in decision making. It is also typical that corruption occurring in Finland, that the activities or behavior classified as corruption are technically legal, but still unethical. And even though I'm a lawyer, I don't think everything can be solved with making it illegal. And when this comes together with frameworks like this, we face the problem. We cannot make the framework for measuring corruption in terms with these special countries, such as Finland, but at the same time, not every aspect of the framework might not be relevant to countries like this, like Finland. Of course, in ideal world, we would be able to follow the framework perfectly, but in real world, we often face budget constraints. So it is often necessary to allocate the narrow resources where they could be used the most effective way. The framework is aiming to produce data on every aspect of corruption, not just bribery and street-level corruption, but the challenge is to find the most useful indicators for doing that. If you think about Finland from the framework's perspective, the most relevant sections would probably be trade in influence, conflict of interest, management of public finances, and public producement. The Finnish government has identified sectors with higher risk of corruption. Those include construction sector, public producements, community planning, political funding and decision making, foreign trade and its promotion, and sports. And the least relevant section from the framework regarding Finland would probably be bribery and obstruction of justice. And meaning by least relevant, I by no means that mean that they would be irrelevant in general discussion. Quite the opposite. I only mean that they would probably be the ones not providing accurate information about corruption in Finland. At the worst case scenario, we would be using indicators that do not measure the forms of corruption Finland has, and therefore we would get false results that there is no corruption in Finland. The framework contains multiple different, quite detailed measurements of corruption, and with my background, I don't think it's not that useful to go very detailed matters when discussing this. Of course, every country faces problems like this with general frameworks, because frameworks like this will never be able to capture every country's unique features. I hope my presentation today has helped to understand the shapes of corruption we have in Finland. If you would only remember one thing from my presentation, I hope you would remember that Finland and other countries alike Finland do have corruption, even though it's not measured as easily as some other forms of corruption. Corruption is ever-changing topic and phenomenon, and I think it always finds different forms and shapes, and it's therefore crucial we always try to stay one step ahead in the fight against corruption. Frameworks like this are extremely useful tools for that, not only for researchers, but in practice too. I think this is a good place to wrap up my presentation and give the stage to Pekka, who will hopefully fill the statistics gaps left by me. I will happily answer any questions if there is when it is time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia. Pekka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Pekka Hänninen, and I'm working at Statistics Finland. I'm trying to share my presentation. Hope you can see it.
We can see it, yes.
Okay, excellent. First of all, a little background for justice production at Statistics Finland. We produce 6 justice and crime statistics and 5 election statistics. And we have 5 persons working in our team. And in addition to production statistics, we have some minor tasks too, but as a rule, our task is to produce statistics. And what kind of statistics we produce regarding corruption? All the corruption statistics we produce are included into the crime statistics. They are the only corruption-related statistics that we produce at Statistics Finland. And the statistics are statistics on offenses and coercive measures. That includes offenses that are reported to the police. So there is no statistics for example, hidden crimes. And secondly, we produce statistics on prosecutions, sentences, and punishments. And there for example, information from sentences, form of punishment, its length, dismissed and lapsed charges, for person, gender, age, nationality, place of residence. And what are the data sources for corruption-related offenses? The data sources for statistics are only administrative registers, Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Justice. And here is our production system in a nutshell. As mentioned before, all the corruption-related data we get from registers, and we get it from there electronically. And then at Statistics Finland, we make classifications, calculations, process the data, make corrections, and as a result, we have statistics on our website. And here is a small table about how the corruption-related crimes look in Finland. For this includes around 30 corruption-related crimes. And for example, in 2021, there were more than 3,000 corruption-related offenses reported to the police, and around 400 sentences were made about them. Most of these offenses are frauds or embezzlement crimes. And what are the pros and cons using administrative data on corruption-related crimes? Here are some of them that we think are important. On the positive side, there is a reduction of response burden and reduction of costs of statistics. And on the negative side, we are very, very dependent on our data suppliers. And changes to the systems whose basic purpose is administrative are usually very slow. For example, if we want some new information about corruption, the road might be long and difficult. And at last, I would like to say a few encouraging words about producing statistics. We have tried new technologies, for example, machine learning techniques for non-structural data, and try to make statistics of them, and they seems to be very good for that kind of data. And here are some points that I would like to highlight to the end. The data sources for corruption are from our statistics are exclusively administrative registers, and unfortunately it can take a long time to bring reforms to these registers. And our statistics contain information only about those corruption crimes that have been reported to authorities. And the use of new technologies can open up new opportunities for better statistics on corruption. That was my presentation. Hope I didn't exceed my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Pekka and Sofia, for giving us the perspective from Finland and for highlighting the specificities of the Finnish situation and the current data collection practices, and also the outlook for the use of technology in the future. Thank you very much for that. There is perhaps one comment in the chat function, which I think is addressed to you. Feel free to address it already yourself online. We may come back to it if there is time towards the end. At this point, we will move to the perspective from Mexico. So again, Oscar will give us his perspective, but this time wearing the national hat of Mexico, and he will talk to us about the efforts to use the statistical framework to measure corruption in Mexico. Please, Oscar, the floor is yours again.
Thank you, Antoine. I'm going to thank you. The presentation is already there. I just would like to take a moment to congratulate UNODC for this achievement. It's very important. Salome mentioned, it took time to develop this framework, and it was done with proper care, but also with a global consultation that allowed the participation of many countries, many member countries, to in the discussion, and also for the input to improve this framework. To congratulate UNODC for the adoption of the endorsement in the Statistical Commission for this framework, that along with the classification of statistical activities that includes governance statistics as an output or aligned to the already approved standard, the manual for producing statistics on governance, that of course includes also corruption measurement. So that gives momentum to what we have to do now, that is to make diagnosis already, to know how close are we from this framework, and what is have to be done in order to implement it. So my presentation is divided into sections. The first one is about the experience of INEGI, the National Statistical Office for Mexico, to measuring corruption, and the second one on the implementation strategy to measure corruption according to the framework. Next, please. About the experience, I will next. Thank you. Since 2011, INEGI Mexico has measured the dimensions of corruption and the institutional capacities to address this problem. First, through regular specialized service, a standalone service that give us approximation to the dimensions of the problem. So this allow, in addition to monitor also the Sustainable Development Goals, and we do this by measuring perceptions, experiences of corruptions, and also complaints of corruption acts. About the institutional capacities, we have several national government censuses through which we collect information on institutional capacities to prevent and combat corruption. Next, please. About the national service, we have two. We have one that is focused on government quality and impact, that is for population, directed to population, age 18 years and older. The sample size is 46,000 households, and we collect this information every 2 years. We have another similar to the one on population, but directed to businesses. So we targeted to economic units of the private sector. The sample size is nearly 35,000 economic units. And we have done this twice, in 2016 and 2020, the collection of this survey. About administrative records, we do the collection through the national government censuses. We have several. We collect information from the federal public administration, the state public administrations, that in Mexico is a federal country. We have 32 states, so we have 32 state public administrations. Local public administrations, more than 2,400. State institutions, also on public safety, state attorney general's offices for prosecution of justice, the state judicial branch, and also the penitentiary system. Most of these programs, statistical programs, are collected annually since 2011. Next, please. Now, some relevant estimates and figures. First, about from the service, from the national service that collect information on the dimension regarding experiences and also, thank you, and also perception. But this one is from prevalence of corruption. This is experience of corruption. On the left, for population, 18 years and older. We've been collecting this since 2013. And in 2019, the prevalence of corruption, that is mainly that population 18 years and older that had a contact with a public servant and experienced an act of corruption, in 2019 was 16% of the population. And in 2021, it decreased, possibly for the pandemic, that implied less contacts with public servants. Nearly 15% of the population experienced corruption when contacting a public servant. For economic units, in 2016, 6%, and in 2020, 5%. We also measure the cost of corruption for population and also for economic units. We can disaggregate these in the case of population by type of formality, and in the case of economic units, that is less accurate than the one for population, but we disaggregate by the size of the economic unit. Next. Just to show a small example of what we collect from the national government censuses. Here I show the rate of public servants in internal control agencies per 1,000 public servants. We collect this, as I mentioned before, for the federal governments, the state governments, the public administration at the local level as well. And this is just a hint because we collect many other information regarding the activities of internal control agencies. Next, please. For offenses, here I show you some of the figures that we have for prosecution of justice in 2021. 21,840 in prosecution of justice. The total offenses recorded, mainly for abuse of authority, 65%. In administration of justice, 4,257 offenses in relation to corruption, 38% for other acts of corruption, and 35% for bribery. In the penitentiary system, a total of 854 offenses that were recorded, most of them, 2/3, for bribery. Next, please. Now I will go to the second section thinking about an implementation strategy. We made a review for these the available indicators that INEGI has. And next, please. Next. And this is what we have for in the case of the first dimension, corruption as area criminalized in the United Nations Convention against Corruption. Well, for the bribery of national public officials, that comes mainly from what Salome mentioned regarding direct measures, from surveys about experiences of corruption and also perceptions. We cover most of the categories included. For trading in influence, we only collect information regarding that, the information that we can collect to the national government censuses on investigations and on administrative investigation, and also on criminal investigations, prosecution, and convictions. Next. For illicit enrichment, we have information, again, regarding on what we collect through these government censuses, and specifically on investigation, prosecution, and conviction, as well as income declaration and asset evolution regulation. For embezzlement, we have only the information from investigation, prosecution, and convictions. Next, please. Is the same from abuse of functions and obstruction of justice. We do not have any information, but for abuse of functions, again, on investigation, prosecution, and convictions. Next. On the dimension of preventing measures, we collect information on independence and integrity of the judiciary, also for conflict of interest and management of public finances, limited, but we also collect information. Next, please. For public procurement, we only, what we collect currently is about public contracts awarded without competition. For elections and public office, what we do have, it's about direct measures from a national survey on civic culture that allow us to have information regarding the population who experienced vote buying during the past election to this national survey, as long as perception of corruption on the elections. Next, please. On the dimension of preventing measures, to finalize this dimension, we collect information on public reporting as well as preventive measures for the private and state-owned enterprises, and limited on preventive measures, mainly on proportion of enterprises with a complaint unit, and also on training programs. Next. And on the last dimension, on enabling environment to report and address corruption, we have information we collect annually on extraditions and also on resources allocated to by corruption, and also on a regular basis on transparency and limited information that we collect on protection of reporting persons. Next. Summing up, from the total 110 indicators in the statistical framework to measure corruption, at INEGI in Mexico, we can measure 57 from the 110. That is 52%. On the first dimension, we collect information from 52% of the total areas covered, implementing measure 49%, and on the third one, enabling environment to report and address corruption, 61%. What can we do at INEGI for the indicators that we do not have, that are not available? Well, we have several programs to develop statistical standards for administrative responsibilities, also for human rights violations, and also for the collection of statistics on supreme audit, administrative, and labor matters. With this work that is already, we are already doing it, we can in the next future, in the near future, we will be able to collect information on several of those indicators that we do not have available now. Next. So to conclude, for the regulation and normative indicators, that is an area that we do not have any information available. INEGI will seek an agreement. We already work with the executive secretary of the National Anti-Corruption System. We have been working with them, and we are planning to talk with them to integrate information, since it is coordinating, there is a coordinating body of the system and of the public policies on the subject. For indicators on the perception and experiences of public servant, that is an area that we haven't covered. We are thinking about a service applied to public officials on integrity and practices in public management. So that would be a project that we will have to work on. On indicators on administrative misconduct and its characterizations could be collected with implementation of the technical standards on administrative responsibilities that we are already working, and that will be very important in order to collect information coming from the 32 states, from the several and the complexity of the normative and the legal framework that we have at Mexico for this case, for administrative responsibilities. That would be all from my part. Thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity to present the experience of INEGI in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oscar, for giving us this really interesting overview of the state of the art of corruption management in Mexico. And it's really also, it's heartening to see that almost 1/2 of the indicators that are included in the or actually a little bit more than 1/2 the indicators in the framework are already available in Mexico. This is really encouraging, and it's also inspiring to see your commitment to generating the other indicators which are not already available. So thank you so much for that. We are running a little bit behind time. We will move on to our next speaker. I just wanted to mention also in the chat, again, there are some questions which seem to be addressed mainly to Oscar, so feel free to address them directly. We will try to come back to them, but we are really running behind time. In particular, there are some questions about asset recovery, which perhaps can be addressed. At this point, we move on to the perspective from Italy. Ms. Giusy Muratore from the National Statistical Office of Italy will talk to us about the challenges in implementing the statistical framework to measure corruption. Giusy, thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I'm really impressed speaking after the Mexican experience. It is very, very interesting. Okay, first of all, consideration. I really believe that the statistical framework for measuring corruption is really very good and comprehensive framework. And because it includes different types of direct and indirect indicators and measures different types of corruption. So this is very useful for measuring corruption, but we need this multi-source approach that is a fundamental, since a multifaceted complexity of corruption, but is also difficult to implement it. In ISTAT, we really believe that we have to work a lot on measuring corruption. And this is the reason for which we provided support to the Conference of State Parties, the COSP, of United Nations Convention Against Corruption, December 2019. And we really support the resolution 810 of measuring corruption. And this is also the reason for which we support the G20 Italian presidency when there is this strong commitment in doing an inventory of what countries measure corruption and in producing a manual of guidelines of good practices. And we, as ISTAT, we were involved on this because we really believe on the importance of this aspect. Obviously, we don't have a comprehensive statistical system in Italy, and we are at the beginning. For instance, we measured the SDGs, the 1651, towards a module on corruption in our victimization survey. We did it in the 2015-2016, and now it is repeated in 2023. So the survey is ongoing yet. And the sample is a big sample of people between 18 and 80 years old. There are indicators from surveys that regard direct experience on 8 sectors of potential corruption and corruption, more on bribery. It is a health, social assistance, work, education, public offices, police, justice, and public utilities. And the indicators are prevalence rate of bribery, incidence rate, and the multiple sector victimization experience and the dynamic of corruption. What was asked as exchange, how many, the reporting behaviors, the utility of corruptions. And then we estimate also indirect experience of corruption by region and sector, and the nepotism. I don't know if it is correct, the translation is about all the wheels and the rates and diffusion of the culture of corruption. So this means the recommendation. Other indicators are about assisting to money exchange at work or the vote buying experience and the perception about diffusion corruption between professionals and entrepreneurs and own experience directly. And recently, in our questionnaire, we added also the tolerance of corruptions. But, for instance, we do not have data on corruption in businesses. What else? We have data about administrative data on corruption, on offenses and perpetrators. So police statistics and justice statistics. In this way, we collect information on the emerged part of corruption, law enforcement activities and judicial process of the phenomenon. So data regards crimes and people arrested or under investigation, people brought to courts, convictions, and people prisoners. One other data comes from the Italian National Anti-Corruption Agency, ANAC, that have important data on public procurement.
Giusy?
Yes, Yes?
I'm very sorry to interrupt. I think something happened with your microphone and we don't hear you very well like we were at the beginning. We still hear you, but not very well. Maybe it could possibly you moved your mic, perhaps. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I can try.
We hear you well now. Now it seems to be fine.
Okay, okay. So it's a problem of connection, perhaps. So I was saying that we have data from the Italian National Anti-Corruption Agency that have data about public procurement used to look at some factor risk. For instance, about the typology of user procedures, whether the call for tenders were published, the period, and the time and number of bidders, characteristics of winning bidders, price of procurement, and cost overruns. What is very useful was some years ago was not useful but interesting. We have an agreement between ISTAT and ANAC, and on this basis, there were interesting analysis based on linkage between businesses, registers, and database of public procurement. And this was very, very useful because we could look at the profile of winner businesses, the health from the socio-economic point of view, and some red flags that were interesting that coming out from this analysis. Nevertheless, all this data collection are very important, okay, but are not a system of statistics, so they are not systematized. And so there is really the need of a framework, but it is not easy. Now in ISTAT, we are creating a task force that link together more departments as a national accounts or the, for instance, Department of Economic Activities, both with the social and justice statistics activity, in order to produce much more data and with just in a more organized way. So the other problem is that the indicators are not so easy to be understood. We need much more good statistics competencies and also much more interagencies cooperation between different ministries and the subjects that are involved in corruption studies, and really a better statistical awareness and yes, to look at all these kind of sources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giusy, for giving us this narrative about the participation of Italy in the entire process and the way you have supported us to get to the point where we are now, and also for showing us your commitment and illustrating your efforts to address the difficulties and the challenges in coming up with these data. As we know, none of this is easy, but we appreciate the effort and the commitment. We are a little bit behind time. There is one question or one topic which seems to have come up in the question and answer session, which I wonder if we can touch upon if Oscar is still with us. Oscar, I was wondering if you would like to comment a little bit about the measurement of asset recovery, if there are any plans to strengthen the measurement of asset recovery in the Mexican context. This is a couple of questions came up on this topic in the Q&A.
Oh, thank you, Antoine. We do not have this type of information, and we will have to plan something regarding asset recovery with several institutions in Mexico. We will have to first locate which is the one that has the information. As I mentioned, the complexity in Mexico has to do with it's a federal country, so we can have information at the federal level with the institutions that can have this information, mainly for prosecution of justice, but also at the state level that we will also have to make further inquiries in order to determine how can we do this by not duplicating the information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oscar. There was actually also another question which I believe was addressed to you. I think you did comment about it, but perhaps it just requires a clarification. The question was whether there were any questions about corruption in the census. But I think perhaps you were talking about the government census, but yes.
Yes, indeed. We do not collect information on the population censuses that we have every 10 years, well, mainly every 5 years, because every 5 years we also make an enumeration nationally, nationwide, for population and households. But no, we do not include any questions there. What we do is on as I mentioned, on a standalone service that measure not only corruption, but give us a picture of the contact that population has with the governments, the several governments, for proceedings and also for public services. And then with that, we have the universe of population that had a contact with a public servant, and then we can measure corruption. We believe that is the best approach. And on the government censuses that are directed to governments, we collect information on administrative cases and also the criminal justice system, as we reviewed before.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Thank you. I see one hand which is raised. I just want to give the opportunity to Amira Shaher Abdelhamid, if she would like to very briefly take the floor and ask a question. If this was an intention to ask a question, please unmute your mic if you would like to take the floor quickly. Miss Amira Shaher Abdelhamid, are you with us? Would you like to make a quick question? You need to unmute yourself. No, I think perhaps this was maybe a mistake or forgotten hand. I would at this point just very briefly like to ask Salome if you would like to make any final remarks before we close.
Thank you, Antoine. Well, just to thank our speakers for joining us. I think your insights are very interesting, and it's good to have different perspectives. I mean, how the traditional data collection on corruption looks like, and what are the challenges to improve existing data collection. I think we got that from Finland, and was very interesting. And I thought like the combination of the experiences of Mexico and Italy, of course, are also very relevant to understand what are they collecting and how do they expect to collect more data, but also what are the challenges to collect or more relevant indicators to better understand this complex phenomena of corruption. And just to say that at UNODC, this is the beginning really for us. I mean, we did these consultations and we have this statistical framework, but we're still discussing about some indicators that are relevant, and we will be happy to get in touch directly with anyone that is interested in finding out more about this framework. And of course, we're very much looking forward for next year to start providing technical assistance for countries to use it more. And yeah, I think with this, over to you, Antoine, and thank you to you as well for helping us in moderating this session.
Thank you so much, Salome. I would like to, from my side, reiterate and what you have just said. This is really just the beginning. We realize that data doesn't fall from the sky. There is a lot of work which still needs to be done. We have done the groundwork. We have set up the framework. Now we need to work to actually implement all of this and to try to harvest data. We realize also that we cannot expect every country to produce data for every indicator. This is not the idea, as already has been said. It needs to be contextualized. It needs to be adapted to the national context and environment. But I believe we all agree that it gives a way forward for us to have a common language to discuss and to measure this phenomenon. So with that, I would just like to thank all the participants and all the panelists. I hope that this forum was useful, and I hope that it is just the beginning of a much longer conversation. Thank you to all of you.
And thank you to the Praia Group for also jointly organizing it with us, and to the interpreters as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
All the best.
Have
Bye-bye.
a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.